Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today, we are going to talk about our production of Elf and some unique and struggles that we had during COVID and making this show happen. So first, we're going to start with some introductions, talking about with members of the cast and the production team. So what roles did everyone have? I'll go ahead and start. I was in Elf. I was Buddy the Elf, so kind of a big deal.
I was also in Elf. I was Jovi, and I was a significant other of Buddy.
I was Emily. I was Buddy's like stepmom and Walter Hobbs's wife.
And then I was the assistant director, and then I was also in the show.
I was the assistant stage manager, and I was also in the show.
Awesome. So that is everybody we're going to be talking with today. So to start off some questions, we're going to start with some production. What new processes did you experience on the production team end of things and preparing for the show?
So with getting ready for rehearsal every day, normally we have a sign-in sheet where actors were responsible for checking off that they were there for the day. But instead, with COVID, we had to be taking temperatures every day to ensure that everyone was safe and okay to be at rehearsal. And that involved actors having to wait 10, 15 minutes for their temperatures to be okay if they were like coming in from the cold. We also had the struggle of during our breaks, we had to fog. Everything had to be disinfected every hour and 20 minutes during rehearsals. That included the stage, the sitting area. Hand sanitizer was all over the theater, as well as our production meetings did pose a challenge because we were over Zoom for all of our production meetings, and our set designer was not able to be in person. So we were taking a lot of his work and just having to translate that like over Zoom and through photos instead of him being in person.
Yeah, and something else that was different this time more than anything was understudies. We like sometimes do them, but in these shows in particular, it was very important because anyone could get sick at any minute, and like we needed someone always to be ready to fill in. So that was something that we took very seriously this time around. And then masks, obviously. We were masked every day until the performance, and it really changes what the show looks like. Like, people would get notes that they wouldn't normally get because we rely a lot on our face and our facial expressions to tell the story. And so, like, when you cover that up, it really changes everything. And then social distancing in the theater was a really, really big thing. We taped out the seats so they were all 6 feet apart, and so everyone had to stay 6 feet apart when they weren't on stage. And I think that was probably the biggest thing that was different this time.
Yeah, I know for me, I'm usually like all over like everyone and like hugging and like, oh, it's so good to see you and stuff. So it's weird, like we all had to sit 6 feet apart. So now we're gonna go to the actors, and I was just curious what some challenges each of us had due to COVID and what are some things we learned.
So it's not like rare that we aren't allowed to touch people on stage. Like there's always some distance to create tension. But in some intimate scenes that we were supposed to have, we had to wait until the day of the performance to actually do it, which I mean, probably ultimately was better because there was no practice. We just ran right into it, literally. um, um, and I think that was like a big change, not necessarily a bad change, I think, but it was definitely different to be able to connect with somebody on the day of the show instead of working on it.
For sure. Made the awkwardness more authentic.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I definitely learned throughout. This is like the largest role that I've ever had, and I'm like always on the stage, never off. But so like this was like, oh my gosh, I'm a lead, but with all of like the constant uncertainties and like, are we going to be able to record? Are we going to get stuck in another quarantine? That kind of stuff. It was really easy for me to get not only overwhelmed with how much acting work that I had to do, but also overwhelmed of like, is all of this going to pay off? So it was really hard for me to like keep that positive headspace. But I always would like kind of shift back and find that like we are like the only school that I can think of right now that's actually doing shows. So even though it is weird and we're in masks and I'm like constantly pulling my mask to sing and stuff, like it all makes it worth it because at least we're getting to do art.
Some of the things that I found very challenging was respecting all of the rules. I like to do what I want sometimes, which I mean, like sometimes you can get away with like having your mask down if there's absolutely no people in the room with you. Like if you've just been running around and you need to take a breath, like you just had a big dance number or something like that. But like eating in the theater wasn't allowed because you can't be eating around people that's obviously not 6 feet apart and you're going to be unmasked. And that also meant that a lot of our usual eating spaces were off limits, like the lobby was not allowed anymore. Um, so that made it very difficult, especially during tech when we couldn't really leave. That was a little frustrating. Actually remembering to put my mask on backstage during the actual show, like people would be like, and I'd be like, what are you talking about? And they just like point at your mouth, and I'd have to find my mask if it was in my pocket or wherever it was hiding, which is another thing, like actually keeping track of your mask. Like I know during Elf, people had so many costume changes, so many. And at one point, um, multiple people I saw like frantically patting themselves down looking for their masks, and they were like, well, I'll find it. And they did, and they put it on. But it was funny, but also kind of like very difficult. And doing things that you have to do in theater, like helping people with costume changes and scene changes and things like that, while doing masks is difficult because um like you need to have your mask on. Like I helped people with quick changes a lot, and they were unmasked because they had to change their outfits, so I had to be masked, like for sure. Obviously whenever you were backstage you were supposed to be masked, but it was difficult. And scene changes, you had to have your mask on to do them, but depending on if you were coming in on the next scene or like transitioning, because a couple of them, the transitions, I was going right back onto stage, so it was difficult because I had to remember to take my mask actually off because I was going to go back on stage, because you don't want that on the film. But
So as you can see, there were a lot of different like unique struggles that came with COVID that we didn't really think about. And one of the big things was, yes, there were all these struggles when we were in person, but there were also some unique challenges when we had to transition to Zoom. So I'm going to have some people talk about that.
So I think the biggest thing for the quarantines was that the quarantines worked out on Freaky Friday to the point where we had 3 months to do Freaky Friday, which is just like unheard of here. I didn't even realize it took 3 months until I think it was Austin. Austin came in one day because he was in town and said it out loud, and he was like, yeah, you guys have been working on this for 3 months. And I was like, oh my god. And then because that took so long, we had around 2.5 weeks to do Elf. So that transition over was like insane. We had to like switch the set over super fast. We had to completely just like switch our brains on like the drop of a dime. And the rehearsal schedule itself was like insane. I remember like we sat down and we looked at it and we're like, okay, we have 2.5 weeks. Let's just plan this out. Let's do it. And then also because of quarantine, we were also often missing bodies like in person. So we had to like ask people to either come if they wanted to, or we just often ask people to fill in and just like, hey, be a body here. Like we need to see what it looks like. And we also, which was something very new, so people needed to be like ready and willing to jump in and help. So that was very helpful. Because we had a lot of people who would come learn the dance, so we had helped teach people when they came back from quarantine. So I think those two were the biggest issues that we ran into, but ultimately it worked out. It worked out great. But
And with what Riley said, a lot of our choreography had to be taught while we had people in quarantine. So people were having to learn over Zoom. There was a day that there were 6 hours of tap rehearsal, and people learned how to tap. People who had never done tap before learned how to over Zoom with our choreographer. And that really continued through the show. There was always at least one person having to be on Zoom every night. And well, that was a very big struggle both for the actors and for the production team and direction. We never really fully got to see what everyone looked like on the show, on stage until tech, which was very scary and very stressful. But and as Riley mentioned, because of choreography, we would have people standing in, filling in. Our dance captains were very integral in having people being able to learn this show because they were given such a short time to be able to. And so choreography was definitely something that was very hard to be able to juggle, especially with how dance heavy this show was. And that about every 3 numbers ended up being a very large choreographed number.
Absolutely. Along with choreography, another big struggle that we had to kind of learn how to make the best of it was singing over Zoom. And it was a lot of just like hoping that everyone was singing, because the way Zoom works, there is no way for all of us to sing or even talk at the same time. Like if you wanted the 5 of us right now to talk at the same time, it's not going to happen. So singing with a cast of 40 people is also not going to happen. So what our big like plan was whenever we would sing as a cast would be Jason, our music director, would play the piano with him unmuted, and then everyone else in the cast was muted. So you'd be sitting there. I know, like, I was in my basement over Zoom for like 3 hours just listening to Jason play the tunes and me singing like to the void because nobody's going to hear me. So it was just very unique and just very strange because you couldn't like pick up if like you didn't know a section, there was no one else you could like listen to. So just like kind of funky. So like along with all of these struggles, we did end up making a really amazing show that we're super excited for you guys to see. And I think during COVID especially, Elf was such an awesome choice for Steven and David to make, even though they kind of made it before COVID hit. It worked out so perfectly because it has lots of things to bring us together.
Yes, definitely. I have always loved Elf because it's hilarious, but it's also very heartwarming and sweet. And I was really excited to play Emily because it's a large role that I've like something I've never really gotten to play. Like I've never gotten to play the mom part. I was very excited to have Gavin as my son. And um I also had a incoming freshman as my other son, and he and I worked so well together, and I had so much fun working with him. And like that is something that was a little challenging because we didn't get to work as closely as we would have and get as like emotionally close um and build that family bond. But I think it still worked really, really well, and like it did feel like a family. Like like loved helping him out around backstage and everything, and like being like, hey, how you doing? Like you felt like my little theater baby. And then having Sam come back to play the dad, like it all felt very fitting as like the mom, the dad, and the children. And it was very interesting because it really did help me feel like brought together in the family sense. And especially since we all were like 2 weeks to put this show on, working very closely together, we all had to be a tight family, and we had to work with each other and be kind, of course, to each other. And it's it was very, very very fun and very family oriented, as I think our theater always is. Like it's always the theater fam. But like Elf is really heartwarming, and there were parts in the show where Gavin made me cry. So it is very heartwarming and touching when you're actually in the show and you can relate it to yourself.
Yeah, and along with that, it's kind of like a mirrored image of now, because him arriving in New York is literally like a needle in a haystack. Like, New York is such a gloomy place. There's sarcasm everywhere. I mean, Jovi is literally the opposite, like the complete opposite of Buddy. So just seeing how crazy something is and then finding one thing that, or one person that can change the whole city, in order to make Christmas come alive again, is it's very fitting, and it's very, as Lizzie said, heartwarming, and just it gives you a little bit of hope for the Christmas season, even if you aren't going to be with your family, for safety or whatever happens. It's definitely a mirror of what this is right now for us.
So I know what you're all thinking. After that, where do you view this awesome show that just got released to the public?
You can view Elf by going to the Gundlach Theatre page, which is www.gundlachtheatre.org.
On the homepage, there's a button that will redirect you to Showtix for You, which is a website where we are streaming the show.
You can purchase a virtual ticket there and you have access to this amazing production for 48 hours.
We hope you join us in bringing Elf from our home to yours.
Thank you for taking time out of your busy holiday schedule to listen to us just talk about what a great experience Elf was. Bye.